During the years post-World War I, a brutal murderer stalked the streets of Hanover. Known as the Wolfman, he would lure boys and young men back to his apartment before subjecting them to what he called his love bite. Today, we delve into the case of serial killer Fritz Haarmann, the Wolfman of Hanover. Born on October 25, 1879, Friedrich Heinrich Karl Haarmann was the youngest of 6 children. While his mother Joanna doted on him, his father was the complete opposite. Ollie Haarmann, known as Sulky Ol, was an argumentative man whose short temper was made even worse by his heavy drinking. At age 7, Fritz began school, where his behavior was considered exemplary, though his academic performance was poor. He was said to be introverted, had few friends, and would later claim that a teacher molested him when he was 8 years old. At home, he enjoyed wearing his sister's dresses and playing with their dolls, both of which were hobbies that his father disapproved of. In a bid to toughen him up, Sulky Ollie sent his 15-year-old son to a military school in Breisach, a town in the south of Germany. Despite enjoying his time there, Haarmann was sent home after suffering anxiety neuroses, later re-diagnosed as epilepsy, a condition which he would suffer from for the rest of his life. For a time, Fritz then worked in his father's cigar factory. During this period, the first signs of what were to come began to be revealed. While working at his father's factory, Fritz began to lure boys into secluded areas and cellars, where he would abuse them. Though he was soon arrested, a psychiatric evaluation by psychologist Gert Schmalfuss would lead to him being certified as incurably deranged. Now seen as unfit to stand trial, Schmalfuss ordered Fritz be detained in a mental asylum indefinitely. However, after 7 months inside, Fritz was able to make an escape and, with the help of his mother, fled to Switzerland. There he began a fast romance with a woman named Erna Lowert. Erna fell pregnant and the pair was soon engaged. This relationship was interrupted when Fritz was ordered to perform his compulsory military service late in 1900. He later stated that his time serving in the military was the happiest period of his life. It wasn't to last, however, as his underlying mental health issues resurfaced. After spending 4 months in hospital, he was diagnosed with dementia praecox, a now outdated psychiatric diagnosis which has since been replaced by the term schizophrenia. He returned to Hanover with Erna and for a while worked once more at the cigar factory. The strained relationship with his father continued to break down, with Ollie accusing his son of threatening to kill him. In an effort to move him on and perhaps bury the hatchet, Ollie helped Fritz open a fishmongery with Erna. Fritz's anger would put an end to this too, however, when he accused Erna of having an affair. Enraged, she put an end to their engagement, and since the business was in her name, Fritz was kicked out and found himself alone. Unable to hold down a job due to his medical ailments, he spent the preceding years committing burglaries, scams, and embezzling money to supplement his measly military pension. But he didn't stop there. Following the end of World War I, the severity of his crimes escalated, eventually turning into the stuff of nightmares. In late September 1918, a 17-year-old boy named Friedel Roth ran away from home and was never heard from again. His father soon learned that his son had been friends with Haarmann, who was known to take young boys back to his apartment to have some fun. By then, Haarmann was an informant for the local police, which was why they were reluctant to investigate him when they learned of his connection to Roth. Eventually, they agreed to visit his apartment, where they found him in bed with a 13-year-old boy. Given the limited laws at the time, all Haarmann was charged with was indecency with a minor. For some reason, the authorities decided against searching Haarmann's apartment, perhaps believing Roth had left of his own accord. Unfortunately for them and the residents of Hanover, this would later prove to be a tragic mistake. Apart from being an informant, Haarmann was also known in his neighborhood as a black market butcher, whose meat products were very affordable. At the time, the German economy was in dire straits, leaving many families struggling to put food on their tables. As usually happens in these situations, many turned to sex work in order to make money, both women and men. Young men would often be seen loitering in the gardens around Café Kropk in Hanover, which was near Haarmann's apartment. Residents in the area soon began noticing that he frequently went home with boys, some of whom were never seen again. Unsurprisingly, rumors began swirling around the city about what Haarmann was doing with his boys. Some claimed he sold them to the French Foreign Legion, while others joked that he was feeding their bodies into a meat grinder and then selling it off to families desperate for food. This tale became so widespread that neighborhood kids reportedly made up a song that went, "Wait just a while. Soon Haarmann will come to you too. With the little cleaver, he'll make liver sausage out of you." In mid-February 1923, perhaps fueled by these rumors, two local women who knew Haarmann, Ellie Schultz and Dortchen Brutzek, appeared at a police station in Hanover, demanding to know whether the meat Haarmann was selling was genuinely pork or something else entirely. According to a translated article from the German news outlet Focus Online, quote, "The two told a strange story. They had seen a young man at their friend's, Fritz Haarmann's, but he had now disappeared. They suspected that their acquaintance had killed and dismembered this boy. They secretly searched Haarmann's apartment and found a bloody apron and a pot full of pieces of meat. They had stolen two of these pieces and had now taken them to the police." End quote. Given this outlandish story, the police, perhaps unsurprisingly, didn't take the two women seriously. Still, they had the pieces of meat examined by a court doctor who reportedly laughed upon doing so. He told the authorities, quote, "I can't smell anything today because I have a cold, but a blind person can see that they are pork rinds." End quote. And with that, the police closed their investigation on Haarmann. More than a year later, in the summer of 1924, a group of kids reported seeing a human skull on the banks of the river Leine, which runs across the city of Hanover. Upon examination, the authorities determined that it had come from a young man whose head had been severed from their body with a knife. Police initially played down the discovery, stating that it was likely left there by grave robbers or medical students looking to play a prank. Authorities were forced to look closer into this discovery when 3 more skulls, all belonging to young boys, were found over the preceding weeks, along with a bag filled with bones. Over 100 Hanover residents then descended upon the river, searching its banks. They found even more bones, which they passed on to the police. Stirred into action, they then had the riverbed dredged, at which point they discovered 500 further pieces of human remains, which they believed belonged to at least 22 different people. It was believed that at least 30% of the remains belonged to males aged between 15 to 20 years of age. Seeing as Haarmann had a long list of convictions for attacks on males between these ages, he was quickly put under investigation. In late June of that year, 2 undercover officers were drafted in from Berlin, as Fritz's time as a police informant meant he knew most members of the local force. They, were then sent to patrol Hanover station, as it was a place that Fritz was known to frequent and a place where many young boys and men had last been seen before disappearing. While there, they witnessed Fritz arguing with the boy. He then approached two other officers demanding they arrest the boy, 15-year-old Kurt Fromm, for travelling on forged papers. They promptly did so, but whatever his plan may have been, this move would quickly lead to Fritz's downfall. While in custody, Kurt told police that he had been living with Fritz for several days and that during that time, Fritz had sexually assaulted him on several occasions, often at knife point. Fritz Haarmann was arrested the following day. As part of their investigation, the police searched his apartment, where they found the walls, floors, and bed heavily blood-stained. Fritz tried to pass this off as simply being blood from animals he had butchered as part of a black market meat trade. However, various clothing and personal articles not belonging to Fritz were also discovered. These items were placed on display at Hanover Police Station, and over the course of several days, they were identified as belonging to young boys and men who had gone missing. To get Haarmann to confess, police officers allegedly used questionable and illegal methods. According to a translated news article from the German news outlet NDR program, quote, 4 skulls are fastened to the corners of Haarmann's cell. The eye sockets were covered with red paper, and there is a burning candle behind them. A sack of bones is also placed in a corner of the cell. Haarmann is persuaded that the souls of the dead would take him. He was also beaten during his interrogation. End quote. These methods only came to light in the 1990s, when the memoirs of Detective Inspector Herman Lang, who had worked on the case, were found. Had they been discovered earlier, it's possible that the authorities would have been forced to release Haarmann. But instead, the methods worked, and in early July 1924, 44-year-old Fritz Haarmann confessed to the murders, saying that he had killed more than 20 young men while sexually intoxicated. He admitted to promising his victims a free meal to lure them to his apartment, where he would convince them to have sex. He states that he never intended to kill them, but that he would become seized by a desire to bite into and often through their Adam's apple. Fritz also informed them that when police initially searched his apartment in connection with Friedel Roth's disappearance in 1918, he had the teenager's head hidden behind his stove, wrapped in paper. Rumours began swirling around Hanover that Fritz had sold the ground remains of his victims as minced pork or beef. Investigations would find no proof of this, however. When asked about the actual number of his victims, Haarmann claimed not to know, casually saying that he had killed around 30 or 40 boys. Later, he would increase this number, claiming to have committed up to 70 murders. Police could only identify 27 victims, and so this was the number of murders he was eventually charged with. During his trial, he frequently misbehaved, even going so far as to smoke cigars and insult those who were present. According to a translated article from the German news outlet Focus Online, quote, Haarmann showed no remorse for the death of his victims in the process. To him, they were doll boys. That was a common term for male prostitutes in the 1920s. In his eyes, they deserved death. End quote. Haarmann's seeming disdain for his victims continued into the courtroom where, when faced with photos of those he was charged with killing, he would claim that he didn't remember their faces before stating, "I probably killed him." Strangely, despite admitting to many of the killings, he claimed that the skulls found in the river weren't from his murders, as he would crush the skulls of his victims before disposing of them. Also on trial was Hans Granz, Haarmann's alleged lover, whom he had met in 1919 while imprisoned for petty crimes and sexual abuse. While they had been living together since then, the authorities could not determine whether he played a role in the murders. Hans would often receive clothes and items from Fritz's murder victims, and it's alleged he encouraged him to murder at least one of his victims, Fritz Wittig, because he wanted the young man's suit. Hans was initially sentenced to death, but this was later commuted to life imprisonment. Haarmann, meanwhile, was ordered to go through a 6-week psychiatric examination in the months leading up to his trial. It was carried out by Dr. Ernst Schultz, who ultimately declared him sane. With that, the court quickly found him guilty of committing 24 murders between September 1918 and June 1924. Haarmann ended his testimony with a chilling statement, quote, "Often, after I had killed, I pleaded to be put away in a military asylum, but not a madhouse. If Granz had really loved me, he would have been able to save me. Believe me, I'm not ill. It's only that I occasionally have funny turns. I want to be beheaded. It'll only take a moment, then I'll be at peace." End quote. 4 months after the end of the trial, on the morning of April 15, 1925, Fritz Haarmann was decapitated by guillotine. With that, the butcher of Hanover was no more. Haarmann's horrific legacy continued to haunt the city of Hanover long after his execution. His head was sent to the Kraepelinisch Brain Research Institute in Munich, where doctors discovered that he had had meningitis, an inflammation of the brain and spinal cord that can lead to drastic changes in one's personality. This, they claimed, could have played a role in the crimes he committed. Many remain fascinated with Haarmann's murder spree. For instance, he was shown with an axe in the 2007 Hanover Advent calendar, which features some of the city's most well-known and influential figures. It caused a public outcry, with the Hanover Tourism Service receiving death threats, while its creators were called blasphemers. Despite this, Haarmann continues to appear in the current Advent calendars, albeit hidden among the other illustrations. Haarmann is also featured in the Police Museum of Lower Saxony in the city of Nienburg. There, visitors may see a replica of his cell, as well as the original cleaver that he used to dismember his unfortunate victims. This grotesque exhibit surprisingly attracts thousands of people each year. Haarmann's crimes may have been influenced by meningitis and the alleged changes it made to his personality. However, there's no denying that he was just as horrifying and depraved as any other serial killer in human history. His insatiable thirst for sex and blood led him to kill nearly 30 young men, perhaps dozens more. Though it's been nearly 100 years since his murder spree, Fritz Haarmann's crimes still haunt the city of Hanover. Right then, take care, and I'll see you next time with another story to make you say, "Well, I never."